Hi everyone, and welcome to Compliance Panel's live webinar. My name is David Benjamin and I'm going to be a host today. On behalf of the Compliance Panel team, I would like to thank you for being part of this event. Today's webinar will be presented by Mr. Chuck Cefalo. Chuck is employed as a Regulatory Affairs Specialist for Analogic Corporation in Peabody, Massachusetts. Chuck has been with Analogic for the last 21 years in various roles related to quality assurance and regulatory. He has been responsible for the establishment and maintenance of quality management systems for both foreign and domestic products. He has a bachelor's degree from Franklin Pierce University and a graduate certificate in medical device regulatory affairs from Northeastern University. Now, before we begin, I'd like to inform you of the program outline for this training session. The webinar is for 60 minutes. First, Cefalo will take you through today's webinar, highlighting the areas that will be covered, and he will then share with you his presentation. We request all to hold back your questions until the Q&A window begins. 10 minutes of time will be allotted for the Q&A, during which your questions will be answered. Now, if for any reason you get logged out of this training session or teleconference, we request you to please follow the same procedure to join in again. And now that we're all ready to start, I request Mr. Cefalo to take it from here. Chuck?
Thank you, David, and welcome to everyone. And on behalf of Compliance Panel, I'd like to thank you for being here today. First of all, as David said, I am employed by Analogic Corporation, who's a manufacturer of medical equipment, complete devices, etc. And before we start this, I'd just like to say that the information and views expressed in this are those of myself and do not necessarily represent the views of Analogic Corporation. So with that being said, let's get on to the webinar. First of all, what is a record? This picture I thought was appropriate when it comes to records that we need to keep in the regulated environment that we're in. But a simple definition of a record in my mind is just documented evidence that an activity occurred. How this is documented doesn't necessarily have to be the piles of paper that's shown on this slide, but combinations of electronic and paper obviously are being used everywhere today. But just to keep that in the back of your mind, that definition. So if we look at what our friends at the FDA are looking for, here is what is in the regulations, that each manufacturer shall maintain a device master record and will ensure that each DMR is prepared and approved in accordance with the document controls requirements. So here, if you're thinking of a record, it doesn't really, this doesn't really fit the queue of one complete activity, but we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. And to continue the regulation, the DMR for each type of device. So each type of device doesn't necessarily mean you have to have for each individual model number. You can combine DMRs for different model numbers. Obviously, they're going to have different bill of materials depending on the models that go out, but you can have a DMR for each type. So that's one point to stress here. Or it shall refer to the location of the device specifications, formulation, component specifications, software specs, everything that you need to define your device or the subsystems of your device if you, rolling up into the device are going to be found in the device master record. And this also includes the production specifications for processing, and including the appropriate equipment specs, production methods, production procedures, production environmental specifications. So those of you who are in different industries where sterilization was needed, where clean room environments are needed, where you have to maintain temperature controls, all that needs to be defined, and it's all part of the specifications and the formulations and the production processes, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail. The final part of the device master record is the quality assurance procedures and specifications. And here it's important that they say that it includes the acceptance criteria and the quality assurance equipment to be used, so things that require calibration, your test equipment, inspection gauges, maybe some reagents that you're using, all the things associated with the test and acceptance of the device before it's released. And then obviously packaging and labeling specifications, including how you package it, how you label it, and the processes used. and then the install, maintenance, and service procedures and methods. And again, not all of these apply to everyone's device, but where they do apply, obviously they have to be contained in the device master record. So if you think in more simplistic terms what the device master record is, it's the recipe on how you build your device, from both the product documentation and the operational documentation for your QA program, which surrounds this. So if we get into these with a little more detail. Now, when they talk about specifications, you have your upper-level device specifications. That it could be a marketing requirement spec that is generated by your organization. It could be a customer requirement spec that's supplied by your customer. So you have to take into consideration all the documentation associated with the top level of the device. As you move down into the device, there's subsystem specifications and component specifications. As you get down into systems, for instance, that contain electronic circuit boards, you'll need to have all the specifications associated with the components. And then software specifications, and I'll talk about this a little bit more for those of you who have complete software devices or devices containing software, either homegrown or third-party, or that your processing uses software. And this has become a very important component for the FDA to take a look at when they come into your facility. Risk management is the other buzzword that's come about from all parts of the planet today. Everyone wants to see how you're controlling your risks. And so in here you would have your risk analysis, your hazard analysis, your FMEA, however your organization performs your risk management activity would be included within the device specifications. And then any third-party or customer specifications included. And third-party here also, third-party software specifications. There's a lot of devices out there now that include LabVIEW, MathWorks, even Microsoft Office products like Excel may be running as part of a program within your device or during the manufacture of the device, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. But third-party software has become a very visible item on the eyes of the FDA, the things that they're looking at, and how you control third-party software, even if it's included in your device. I mean, large-scale devices like an MRI system or a CT system, and even software systems in themselves, such as a PAC system that archives radiology imaging for a radiologist to view at a later date. All of these contain homegrown software as a user interface, but there's also third-party software involved where they may be using Microsoft Windows as a baseline. So you have to really think about how you control these software specifications, either included with your device or during the processing of your device. Your production and process specs. I mean, these are pretty much common sense things that would be included in there. Your assembly drawings, your bill of materials, any chemical processes that would be performed as part of your production process. And if you're using any agents as part of the production process but do not get included within the device when you ship it, for instance, if you're doing circuit boards, you may have a flux cleaning process that cleans. You'd use a cleaning agent, you use flux, and both of those are removed. So you have to have the specifications for those included in your device master record. And again, these items will all trickle down into your device history record to show that you're actually following these processes and specifications. Again, anyone that's doing sterilization, you may be doing it in-house, you may be sending it out. All of these processes, you must have the control documentation in place as part of your device master record. Now, sterilization that's done by a third party or any other production process for that matter. There's a lot of outsourcing these days, and most of the QSIT audits that the FDA have performed over the past, I want to say 9 months to a year, when I was at the conference in Boston last year where Kim Troutman, who's the Part 820 expert for the FDA, she spoke of the agency's move out of the design control area and into the supply chain area as part of their QSIT audits. So they're going to come in, they're going to do CAPA, they're going to do complaints as a standard part of the QSIT audit. But now they're tending to move towards supply chain control. And that's where things like sterilization and outside processes, and even where you're buying your components from. It's very important that you have in place the controls for how you're controlling these suppliers, because this is an area that they're looking for now, and especially where there's so much outsourcing out of the country. FDA is making a big presence in China at this time, for instance. And continuing on here, your test procedures. Obviously, you want to have documented test procedures on how the finished device is going to be tested, or even in-process test before it gets to the final device for your sub-assemblies and components. And at this point in time, I'd like to talk a little bit about 21 CFR Part 11, although this has been in evolution for a long time now. I believe this came out, the last revision that I know of was in April of 2004. And here they're just looking for, that you have a validation of your system to ensure the accuracy, reliability, and the consistent intended performances of electronic records. And again, these electronic signatures are at all these stages through your process. And most people are using electronic document control systems to do ECOs, to release documents. They're using electronic signatures to sign off during processes, to capture data during production processes. So if you're using any of these methods where you're collecting electronic signatures at important stages, that you need to show that you have a good validation process for obtaining these electronic signatures, and that you have the controls in place for your your IQ, OQ, and your PQ for that particular software. Your installation qualification, your operational qualification, and your production qualification for these things. And again, any time during packaging where you have a barcode reader that captures electronic information, may not necessarily be a signature, but it's collecting electronic data that will be transferred into and become part of the device history record. All of this has to be taken into consideration. And then the post-market considerations at the bottom would be, your complaint handling system. I know the easiest method for handling complaints for many companies now is still a paper system, but where the FDA is now moving into the MDR, where they're going to want to see all the MDRs electronically. That process will be coming through within the next couple of years, where they're going to, any reportable adverse events, although, hopefully, most of your complaints are not reportable. But in the case where they will be reportable, these will have to be done electronically. And I've gone through myself the process of establishing this electronic gateway with the FDA, and it was not an easy thing to do. It was took a long period of time, or I'd say over the course of 4 months, before the electronic gateway production was able to be done by myself to transfer information over to the FDA. Okay, now if we now talk about quality assurance procedures, Here they're going to want to see your management review procedure, although they're not always able to look at your management reviews. You need to have something in place to show them that you are performing a management review, and that you should have a letter on file after that management review is performed to say that on this date a management review of the quality system was performed by this individual, and that letter would be the record that you would show to the FDA when they come in. Other quality assurance procedures are the quality plan. Much like the ISO regulations, ISO 1345, you need to have a quality plan. And again, these are all part of your quality assurance procedures. Your quality manual, obviously, would be the key document for them to see here. Any contract review procedures where you're, obviously putting in supplier agreements with your customers or maybe with your distributors. They'll want to see how that process is controlled. Your design control procedures, again, these are all documents and operations which I'm sure anyone that's in the device industry has to have in place anyway. But the key is that you're following these and that you know that your design process output is documented properly, that you've got a proper development plan, that you've got a proper design review procedure, and that you're following these. And for things like third-party software that either is being used or as part of production or being used as part of your product, that you have the proper methodology for the control of the designs and the control of the documentation that's associated with that. Purchasing control is another area, like I spoke of a few minutes ago, that the FDA is really putting their eyes on due to all of the outsourcing that's taking place in the United States. I got an email a few days ago relating to the FDA found out of one single smelting batch of titanium that came out of China ended up in 130 different medical device manufacturers' sites. So just to show you that the control of one supplier, what the effect it could have across the board to other medical device manufacturers who are using the same products, using the same suppliers, using the same outsourcing. You don't know, you have to really have solid controls on your suppliers. So all of these procedures shown here, these are the first part of the quality assurance procedures. Obviously have to be part of your device master record. Now you may think that these procedures actually aren't part of the recipe when you think of the recipe of the product as the bill of materials, as the test procedures, as in the instructions for use, all those things that go along with it. The quality assurance procedures are the ones that make us follow those procedures and control them properly, so that we are able to follow our recipe once the device master record has been completely developed. Other areas for quality assurance, customer supplied materials. Not everyone uses these, but some people are using like a different customer's labeling, or if you have a customer that wants a specific language put on their particular device spin for them, that those would be customer supplied materials. Obviously, you need to have the procedure in place for product ID and traceability, including non-conforming material. Non-conforming material can be a very difficult thing to control if you're doing a lot of outsourcing, and even at software. How can you determine that you've got non-conforming material when you're working with software that's been outsourced? So version control in the area of third-party software, or even on your own software, it's very important that you have proper version control for software. Inspection procedures. Now there's many different levels of inspection procedures. Obviously there's your incoming inspection process for any materials that will be included in the device, a very important part of the device master record, and that within these inspection procedures you have provisions for first articles, whether it be the first time that you're actually buying this part or whether it's a revision change to that part. How do you know that when you went from Rev 1 to Rev 2, Rev A to Rev B, et cetera, that you have the proper inspection procedure in place? So those would be things that definitely are required to be in place in your device master record. Obviously, calibration procedures, and if you have any kind of measurement equipment at all, obviously it needs to be calibrated. Other areas which fall into calibration is if you have golden standards that you use for homegrown test equipment or for setting up certain fixtures, either for manufacturing or for testing, that if you have these homegrown or in-house built golden standards, so to speak, that you have a method in place where they're periodically, maybe not calibrated, but periodically verified to assure you that you're still using a golden sample. How do I know this sample still works? And in some cases, you know, the golden sample may not be one that passes everything. It may be one that you've got, you know, deliberate failure modes included with that golden sample so that you can show, yeah, when everything passes, it passes, but also when there's failures involved. So this would be important in the area of software as well, that you can show that, you know, your test software, for instance, that you've induced failures to show that your test software actually can find things that fail. I mean, some of your inspection and test processes may be so complex, obviously, that you can't test for everything, but you can make sure that you have actually proven that this test procedure or this test process, this test software for automated testing actually has been validated and it meets all the requirements that were necessary to prove that the product being tested actually was tested properly. Another thing to consider would be the intervals where these things need to be done. You can see, I've seen test equipment which you send out, you know, every 3 months, depending on how often it's used. Other test equipment, you know, you can put a system in place where, you know, you send it out every 3 months. If it's not found to be out of cal, you send it out every 6 months if it's not found to be out of cal at that point. So just because the manufacturer says you should calibrate this instrument or this piece of test equipment on an annual basis or on a biannual basis, that you may find that this instrument is good enough that you found that there is there's no need to do it in that time frame. And also, if you do find something that's out of calibration, that you need a method to identify those products that were used or built during the period of that calibration, when you find it that's you have a significant out of calibration alert from either your cal house or from your in-house calibration people. Next would be CAPA and complaint procedures. Obviously, these CAPA and complaints are two areas that the FDA always looks at when they come in to do an audit. Normally, the first thing they look at is the complaints, which has been my experience. And so obviously, your complaint procedures are very important. And audit procedures. They'll want to know that you're doing internal audits, whether they're done by an in-house group like a corporate quality department that good-sized companies will have, or that you've got a third party coming in to perform audits for yourself. And actually, maybe your ISO 13485 audit. There's a program now in place with the FDA where if your third-party notified body is on the list, that there's a third-party audit program in place that the FDA has, where you can actually have your notified body come in and perform the QSIT audit for the FDA, and they will accept their audit in lieu of them having to come visit you. The amount of new devices that go on the market monthly. I don't know if you guys read the gray sheet or not, but every month in the gray sheet, they'll list all the new PMAs that were approved in all the 510Ks. And for the last year, it's been upwards of 200 to 250 new devices every month. And I can't really see the FDA having the ability to keep up with all those. So they're looking to migrate a lot of this over to third parties on the audit side. And there's also the Global Harmonization Task Force in place, which hopefully at some point in time we'll be able to use this same documentation for every submittal we do, not just in the United States, but in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, where the GHTF is part of. So that's something to look forward to, and I think that's the way everybody's going, since there's more and more countries coming online with these requirements. Training procedures. It is very important that you have training procedures not only from a quality assurance side. You know, the FDA requires that you train people to understand the 21 CFR Part 820 requirements, but also that one clause in 21 CFR 820, which is very important, is that the people who are responsible for releasing the product or for performing the final quality assurance and release of the product have an understanding of what can happen if this product fails. So I think that's one key where a lot of companies don't really specify that training to the individuals who need to have it, and that's written right in 21 CFR Part 820. The last piece of the device master record would be your packaging and labeling specifications, and this is all the labels associated with your device. There's any caution labels that go on the outside, whether it be for temperature or for humidity, whether there's electrical shock hazards associated, any mechanical hazards, biological, chemical, and what's the educational requirements as we think about the instructions for use that go along with a product. What are the educational requirements for the person who's going to use this? Is it going to be used by, an elderly person in the home, or is it going to be used by, strictly by a physician in an operating room? So those are some things to consider when you think about labeling that goes along with your documentation. And then you need to have identification for distribution. Where are they? What are they? How many are you shipping at this particular point in time? What are the lot numbers, etc. So this is all part of what is required by the device master record, that you define every one of these elements so that they can be followed, and that the processes are outlined properly at the level of the individual who are going to be using these specifications. And again, I talk about here educational requirements for the end user of the device, but also all these specifications and test procedures and other process documentation. You have to consider who the user is. I mean, are you going to be writing this for multilingual people who are on a production line, who are more apt to you want to be more pictorial in your procedural outlines than if it's going to be a design engineer using it. So those are things that really have to be considered as part of this process of building your device master record. And one thing to note is, if you have a revision change, obviously, with your device or with any major subcomponent, that the device master record revision also changes. I found it much easier in my experience to just write an outline for yourself for each type of device that your organization manufactures, that you type an outline of based on these requirements, what would need to be, what documents do I need to have as part of my device master record, so that you have kind of a checklist to go by, so that up front you'll know, you can have something to go by to tell you these documents have all been released, they're all at the right revision, and I know what documents have to be used for me to manufacture this device properly to make it safe and effective, and that I can demonstrate to any third party, not just the FDA, that we have the quality assurance processes in place, so that the output of these quality assurance processes guarantees me that I have a proper device master record. Installation, maintenance, and service. There are user maintenance documentation that you have to supply here. There's third-party maintenance if you're going to have a third party go out. Inoperability indications. What that means is if there's a point in time where your device is inoperable, you have to be able to relay that information to the end user. Now, it may be obvious that the device is in two pieces. It's a simple device, or it could be as complicated as you need to notify. You have to have an alarm go off either on a graphical user interface or as an alarm, just a physical sounding alarm on your device itself. The periodic maintenance procedures are also included. Whether these be done by the operator, whether they be done by a biomed in a hospital, or whether they be done by your maintenance or your service people. And a service requirement contact has to be included here. So you need to know, what happens if something goes wrong with this. There has to be something in the user instructions that identifies a party for them to call, a phone number, an email address, a URL somewhere that they can that you can be contacted, so that they can get the information they need. And service records. How are you going to record your service records as these go out? So maybe in the back of your maintenance manual you have a form, obviously, that someone fills out if there's maintenance required. Now, obviously some devices are so simple that it either works or it doesn't, or it's disposable and it's thrown away, so there's no service requirements there. But again, all this is part of the device master record, and third-party maintenance becomes tricky because a lot of hospitals now will use third-party people to come in and maintain their equipment, like outsourcing their biomed technicians. And most of the time, I wouldn't say most of the time, but several times when I've visited sites for our equipment, that you find these manuals, they haven't even been opened yet. They're just stacked in a corner somewhere. And so it's always a good idea to at least make sure the operator is handed the manual by either your installer or the distributor, or it's the first thing in the box. The user instructions are the first thing they see when they open the box, so that it's quite obvious to the end user that you've supplied this information to them. Okay, well, that took care of the device master record, and now we'll see how it applies and how it trickles down to the device history record. So if you go all the way back up to the design process, your design history file, and that's a whole other hour to be spent, but the design history file is what creates half of your device master record. Would be the output of your design control process. So your design history file, whether it be the hard specifications that will be used, or your design reviews, things like that are extraneous documents associated with the design. Those are what produce the device master record. So you go from the design control process and from the inputs from the quality management system. Those two molding together become your device master record, and then as you follow your device master record through the manufacturing process, that's where the device history record comes through. So here, again, is the regulation. Each manufacturer shall maintain device history records. And if you think of the example of definition of a record, which was documented evidence of an activity that took place, well, here it makes more sense than it does with the device master record. The device master record would be a whole bunch of activities that took place to create that device master record. But now, as you produce the device, whether you do them individually or whether you do them in batches, that the device history record now can be an activity of producing a device through the use of the device master record. So that would be the record of the occurrence. So each manufacturer shall establish and maintain procedures to ensure that the device history records for each batch, lot, and unit are maintained to demonstrate that the device is manufactured in accordance with the DMR and the requirements of this part. So here they're saying you've made a device master record. Now your device history record's got to show me that you actually followed the device master record that you produced. One item that I didn't talk about that people are using a lot of during the manufacturing process, and it's relevant to your device history record, is if you're using things like access databases to capture data or Excel spreadsheets to perform calculations for you, that somewhere along the line you have to show that those were properly validated by yourself, because Microsoft is never going to claim that any of their software has been validated for use on or with a medical device. So most of the time you'll find a lot more bugs than Microsoft will. And one thing that I want to talk about is that if you include something like say you're including Windows 7 with your device as the operating system, that you need to be able to freeze what service packs you have on that, so that when it gets to the end user, they're not constantly downloading Windows updates that may affect the software that you've created to be used in conjunction with that. So this is something that we have run into in the past, so that we had to freeze our operating system at a certain level and then disable Windows Update on the image that we put on the computer now. I mean, obviously not all of you are involved in systems that use an operating system, but these are things to think about down the line if you're using things from third parties, that how do you control the end user from not changing those or updating those. So just something else for you to consider. The device history record shall include or refer to the location of the following information. And again, the dates of manufacture, the quantity manufactured, the quantity released for distribution. The acceptance records, where are the records that show that you can prove to me that they demonstrated that the device was manufactured in accordance with your DMR. The primary ID label and the labeling used for each production unit, and any device identification and control numbers used. So this is, obviously right out of the FDA regulation. So if we talk about the dates of manufacture, it's obviously the finished device is important. You need to know what the date of manufacture was for that particular device. But subassemblies and components that are included in the device, and this next bullet here, to a recall comfort level for yourself. If you've got a very complex device with many circuit boards and things, versions of software, mechanical components, that you need to, I'm not advocating that if you have a circuit board that you go down to a level of the resistor on the board, but you need to have a recall comfort level for yourself, that if, take into consideration if this product fails in the field and it's attributed to X component, which is part of my device, how do I put my arms around what's in the field if I have to put a recall together? So that's why I say to a recall comfort level. It's all up to you. I mean, if you just want to put a label on the finished device and send it out and say, wow, we found that, you know, this particular component is failing prematurely and, you know, it causes an adverse event, now you have to put your arms around it and you say, where did we put all these? So instead of having to recall maybe, you know, one batch or one lot or even, you know, several units, now you gotta look and say, well, we got these units in, we got these components in 9 months ago, and you know we don't really know where the cut-in date. So now your recall ends up being a lot broader than it needs to be. So that all has to be hashed out as part of your, when you're building your device master record, that you capture those components that you want to be able to be comfortable for if and when a recall is necessary. I mean, hopefully a recall is not something that's done on even an annual basis, I would hope. But there are very many recalls that I see published by the FDA where the number of units is very large, and over you know, you'll see these units were distributed between 2002 and 2009. Now, whether they had, you know, they had purchased all that, or they just don't know where they put the product. So it's important for your organization that you have that comfort level in there. You'll also need the dates of manufacture for accessories, any accessories that you may buy separately and deliver as part of your finished device. Revisions and versions of any hardware, software, reagents, anything that were used during the manufacturer or included with the finished device will be included in your device history record. So those all have to be captured as well. Any expiration dates for anything included with the device. Obviously, you need to have those quite prominent on the product, either on the outside, the inside, or maybe, you know, for each accessory, etc. And you need to identify that you properly removed any manufacturing materials. These are some of this particular category is more important for some devices than of others, but you need to obviously know that you removed those manufacturing materials and the dates of any materials that you used during the manufacturing process if there was a date code involved. And also, when you think of dates of manufacture, if you were using calibrated equipment during the manufacturing process, were those instruments, were those calibration stickers valid during the time of manufacture? So that if, when you go back to look at the test data for that particular device, can you prove that the equipment requiring calibration was actually in calibration at the time of being used? The quantity manufactured. Now, some of you may make, you know, a single device that's, you know, each device is tested or inspected, or you may make, you know, 1,000 that go out to be sterilized and come back, and then you test, obviously, to see if the sterilization was done properly. And again, this is the same list I had on the previous slide, that, you know, sub-assemblies and components, what were the quantities, and again, to a recall comfort level for yourself, that you know where everything is that needs to be recalled. And again, quantity of accessories, the quantity of what revision and what versions went in there. You may have different revisions that are available to be used during one production run, you know, which products had those revisions, and again, the expiration dates in the quantity manufactured. How many were released for distribution? How many finished devices? How many sub-assemblies and components? Again, this is the same list, but for a different category. How many accessories were involved, the revision and versions, and any expiration dates. So all of this, you know, again, is included in your device history record, which goes back to your device master record. Acceptance records. This is where you get your DMR traceability. Who and when were these devices released for distribution? Was it an independent review? In most organizations, if you're big enough, if you're not just a little mom and pop shop that's putting together something small in the garage or in the basement of their house, you need to have an independent review at the end of the line so that, you know, the manufacturing personnel aren't reviewing their own work and sending it out the door. What process was used when it was released? What happened to any nonconformities that were found during the manufacturing process that were repaired or reworked and went back into the device? And what is your segregation process that those went through? So all this would be part of your device history record. And again, the big key to all this is, does the DHR equal the DMR when you get to the end of the line? So a primary identification label is required for all medical devices, either on the device itself, which is preferred, but obviously people can't put big labels on every device. And this is found in 21 CFR Part 801, which are the general labeling provisions for medical devices. So you must have the medical device name and place of business of the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. And this has to be, they use the words, conspicuously placed on either the device and or the package, in some cases both. If it's manufactured for someone else or distributed by someone else, that information has to be placed on the label as well. So for instance, you have something that's built outsourced. It comes in and that label should say manufactured for my organization. If it's going to be distributed by someone else, you may be the manufacturer, or you can say distributed by my distributor. But these are all specific requirements that are outlined in 21 CFR Part 801. They're looking for the city, the street, the state, and the zip code of the company. And the exception is that the street, city, and zip code may be omitted if it's in the current phone directory. So for Analogic Corporation, we could just put Analogic Corporation, Peabody, Massachusetts. So we could leave out the street, for instance. We wouldn't have to put that down. And then we get to control numbers. What were the serial numbers that were included in this release, in this particular device history record? Lot numbers, batch numbers, expiration dates. And again, I stress to the level, there's an extra O in that too, to the level necessary to facilitate a recall. So you want to be able to know where they are, whether they be in country or out of country. If you find an issue that requires you to recall, whether it be a voluntary recall or due to an adverse event, you need to know where your serial numbers, lot numbers, batch numbers, or any specific expiration date or combinations of those, where they actually are, so that you can put your arms around them if you need to get them back in the building. Some references and some guidance here for you. I gave you some links to 21 CFR Part 801 labeling. I don't know if you're familiar with that regulation. It's pretty straightforward on telling you what you need to do. And then there's a couple of links to device master record and device history record through the CFR website, on the FDA website, the CDRH website, and I gave you a link to 21 CFR Part 11. A couple of other references that are available in guidance documents. There's one for using third-party software included within a medical device, which is a very good guidance document. You can find that by just going to the FDA guidance site and entering third-party software. And at this point in time, I would like to open up you guys for some questions, if there are any. Excuse me while I take a drink of water.
Chuck, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. And I would also like to thank all participants for cooperating with us. It is now time for the Q&A to begin, and we request all who have questions for a presenter to click on the raise hand option, which is like a palm-like icon at the bottom of your participants panel, to ask your questions verbally, or post your questions in the Q&A panel so that our presenter can read it aloud and then answer. And if for any reason you're unable to ask your question using either of the two means I mentioned, please share it with me, your host, by chat, and I shall pass it on to a presenter to answer it. And meanwhile, we sincerely request you to share your feedback in the feedback form that will appear on your screen in the polling panel right now. The feedback form is just 6 questions, mostly multiple choice in nature, and it wouldn't take more than 2 minutes of time to answer. The polling will remain open till the end of the session, and you can answer it even after the Q&A is over. As I mentioned below, you can, if you're not able to use the Q&A panel, you can send it to me by chat, or you can use the raise hand icon, which is right below the participants panel. And Chuck, I don't see any questions coming in. May I unmute the participants one by one and ask them if they have any questions? That'll be okay?
Sure, that'd be fine.
Lucia?
None here, thank you.
Alan, do you have any questions?
You're muted. No.
Thank you very much. Amy?
No, I'm good.
Carol, do you have any questions?
I'm good, thank you.
Mandy, any questions today? Michelin? Mimi, any questions for a presenter today?
No, I don't have any questions, thank you.
Thank you. Paula Ring. Rick? Tina Connolly?
Yes, I do. Which notified body is the FDA recognizing?
There's several of them out there. I know TUV Rhineland is one of them. I believe TUV SUD is one of them. UL is another one, I believe, and Intertech is also on the list. But there is a list available on the FDA website that'll tell you that who are the third-party approved notified bodies for that. There is some ramifications associated with that, and you know that when your notified body comes in and does an audit, they can look at your audits, they can look at your management reviews and your supplier audits, whereas the FDA cannot. So there may be some things that that are seen by the notified body that aren't seen by the FDA. But again, if you're very comfortable with your notified body that they do a good job and that you're always in compliance, I don't see a problem with that. There are not a lot of people who are being who are included in that process. For some reason, it hasn't seemed to take off, and I believe it's because of those reasons that I just mentioned. I know last year they solicited 100 companies in Canada, the FDA did, to allow them to participate in a program where their Health Canada audit would be approved by the FDA if they were selling in both countries, and only, I believe, either 3 or 5 of the 100 accepted their offer. And unfortunately for the remaining 95 or 97, they were all put on the audit list for the for the following year. So I personally think it's a great program. We personally haven't gone that route yet because we're multi-divisions in one location. So until such a point in time as we consolidate, at that point in time, I would be very happy to do that, because not only it gives you a comfort level for your notified body, but it also gives the FDA a comfort level that the notified bodies are actually doing a good job, and that's been the issue in the past because of stories, that a notified body sits in a conference room and people bring them procedures all day where they're not actually going out on the floor and reviewing the actual processes. So this whole global harmonization is not going to take place until such time as everyone has a comfort zone that the European guy is doing the same job as the FDA guy is doing the same job as the China compulsory people from the SFDA as the Japanese guy. So I don't think it's going to get to a point of harmonization until everybody feels comfortable, and the only way that's going to happen is if we start sharing information with each other.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Tina, I hope that answers the question.
Yes.
Do you have any other question, Tina?
No, that's it.
Thank you. And Chuck, I don't see any questions coming in.
Okay.
Would you conclude the session? Would you like to say something before we conclude?
Yeah, just to finish, if you look at third-party accreditation, if you put that in the guidance area on FDA, the list should be published there. It's different for different products, much like the third-party reviewers for 510Ks are different for different products. So I know there's a pretty good list that's there, and I'm sure if you're using one of the major notified bodies, they'll be there. Just one thing I'd like to say in conclusion, hopefully this overview wasn't too elementary for your needs, and that you got something constructive out of it. But I'd just like to say that in bringing these and melding your device master record with your device history record together, it's always been, I've always found it easier that if you put a definition up front of what has to be in the device master record and what has to be in the device history record for either each type of device or each individual device, that it's been much easier in the long run, whether it, that someone at the end of the line has a checklist of what has to actually be included in this, whether it be for the DMR or for the DHR. So if one thing I can convey to you, that if you're not already doing that, which I know most companies are already doing, that you seriously sit down and try to put down on paper what do I actually need in my DMR and what do I actually need in my DHR to show that I'm meeting that. So that would be my concluding statement here.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to request you again, if you're not giving us your feedback, to kindly do so. We'll greatly appreciate it. And we are very grateful to all of you for having taken part in this event. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can send us an email to webinars@compliancepanel.com. And if any of you feel that your team members, colleagues, friends might benefit from this webinar, we're happy to inform that it will be available in the recorded format and can be bought from our website, or you can call us at 800-447-9407 or 714-441-5856. We welcome your suggestions and feedbacks or ideas on how we can improve our webinars. If you'd like to get in touch with us or suggest a topic, or desire a customized corporate training online or on-site to ensure that whatever is your training necessity, it will be a priority. We look forward to having you with us again sometime soon and for your continued patronage. And on behalf of our presenter, Mr. Cefalo, and the Compliance Panel team, I would like to say thank you for participating in this event and wish you all a wonderful day ahead.